So there's really only two things to discuss on this call, but I think they're both actually pretty big. So the first one is that, as you'll know, the root specification in rough form went out on Friday. So it's section 5.13 of the opportunity modeling spec. Because we're aiming to get data out there for the Ordnance Survey campaign, which I think the deadline for that is September the 29th, that actually means we have to start moving fairly quickly. So I'm hoping to have all feedback that I can integrate into this version of the spec in by August 16th. So that's just over 2 weeks from now. That'll be 2 weeks on Friday. Some of the people on this call have already commented on issues attached to the root spec, so thank you very much for that, and those comments have been extremely valuable. Some of them I haven't responded to yet, but please all jump in as soon as possible, really, because I think it's important to press forward fairly quickly and also to get it right. Has everybody here had a chance to look at it? Andy, I know you have.
Yep, I've had a look through it, and Chris has had a look through as well. So we had a chat yesterday about it.
Okay, fantastic. Is there any feedback you'd be happy to share right now, or is that something you just do on GitHub?
I think Chris was probably going to send. I think he sent you a few things by email. I think he was hoping to, when he gets a chance, add a few things to the GitHub issues as well. But
okay.
yeah, pretty happy with it in general.
Okay, cool, good. Chris Poynton, anything from you?
Nothing beyond. I've been keeping up with the comments, and I've had a run through the specs, so I'm out of comments at this point. Interested to see. Unfortunately, David's from Trainers One has some comments yesterday, but isn't on the call. I was interested to see what the response to those was. I'm just watching those really. Right.
Okay. Yeah. I did see those, and I think they're interesting, and I think they're kind of a scope that I like. It's kind of a fixable scope. So it's not minutiae, but it's also not sort of everything is wrong kind of criticisms. That's nice. And Paul, have you had a chance to review that yet?
I've had a chance to look at some of them, but I'm still catching up from last week, so no. Right, okay. On that short answer.
So if you could do that at your earliest opportunity, which I understand might not be that early.
I'll try and do it this week.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. Yeah. So yeah, that's out there and is, I think, more or less ready to go. Yeah, the issues aren't closed, obviously, but as I say, I think the comments that I've seen so far have all been quite resolvable in terms of the scale of the changes that are needed. But that leaves us with the question of pragmatics, because there's not really any established game plan for actually getting the data out there now. And I think this falls into two activities, and one of them is mapping. So actually getting whatever the data fields are on your internal system and seeing how and if they line up with the data fields that are described for the Open Roots metadata specification. So that's kind of an intellectual exercise, but it's also a pragmatic exercise, and that it'll often, in my experience, you find that the values you're expecting to find in your internal system aren't necessarily the values that are there. So sometimes the semantics in one's internal systems have shifted a little bit over time for a field. So there's not really any substitute for getting your hands a bit dirty with that, but you can make a lot of headway just on your own. And then there's the question of actually how you publish the data. So how do you, once you've decided how all of your fields line up and if they line up, there's a question of actually making it available to the general public. So I guess, first of all, I would just solicit your thoughts on the mapping process. How would you see that actually happening in your organizations?
Andy, yeah, that's true. This is an interesting one, actually, because after the last call we had, we went away and we said, that's good, know the standard, but what is the actual plan for doing exactly this, actually getting the mapping there and getting it provided. So we were looking and we thought, because we don't have stuff yet mapped like this, we've got bits, we thought we're going to have to use something like geodatabases just as a working data set for a small number of routes, and we would actually want to start publishing them. The only way we've really got to do that is through the ArcGIS Online route. We don't have external facing web servers or anything that we can push services out that isn't through that route at the moment. Is that a sensible way? People would be happy? I know there is a slight proprietary thing going through ArcGIS Online, but they would be publicly available.
And with so the data itself would be publicly available then?
Yes. Well, and when you put it into ArcGIS Online, the tables are there, the view is there, and then people can interact via API or services directly. Yeah.
But I guess the license on that is people wouldn't be free to reuse that data. I guess it would be, here's the data.
No, we can put it through the OpenData on ArcGIS Online. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
So yeah, we've got some stuff on there. Our access areas and Neptune scans, as we call them, are available as public data. So that is a route to do that. Okay.
Did other people have thoughts on the approach they were hoping to take, or were you looking for direction from OpenActive on this?
That was a working proposal, I would call it at the moment. Yes, it's.
From our perspective, that's one way that we could go as well. We've got an ArcGIS or an AGOL instance as well, so we might look to do it that way. I was just going to ask how people have been capturing the data though as well, because you've got to be careful how it's captured. It's all very well to make the data available as open data, but if it's been captured, say, against the master map product, the OS product, then there might be some issues there. But as long as that point, I'm guessing we're relying on each publishing entity to have sorted all that out and say that it's open as best as they can make it open.
Yeah, ours is from OpenStreetMap, so that's okay. Yeah. Okay, great.
And how about the Canal and River Trust? Is that an issue that you're facing?
On some of it is. The good people in the GIS department are working where they can to either make it available as open data, or they've had discussions with people in Ordnance Survey to see where isn't the line of where we can go.
Yeah, and how has that been going? So they're moving on that at the moment, the OS, aren't they?
Yeah, in places, yeah, I would say that's
right.
They have been moving, yeah. So it's good. They're moving in the right direction, I think, is a good thing to say.
Okay.
Yeah, it's obviously a really huge question for Ordnance Survey. I can imagine it's a lumbering beast to try to organize how that movement would happen. Okay, so ArcGIS is wondering. So I'm not that familiar with ArcGIS's publishing endpoint. So I find that interesting because, of course, the specification as it exists is not really a GIS specification, right? I mean, it's kind of about GIS data more. So is that something that
you can define the structure of the data published pretty much how you want, and I suppose if it was a standard, then you could probably lobby, argue, whatever, to get ArcGIS to maybe have that as a standard as well. But
okay.
I mean, the other way that we were thinking about doing it is just as doing all those GeoJSON routes. I mean, you can publish it out of ArcGIS as GeoJSON anyway, but we could make it ourselves and then publish it that way. So there's a couple of, as long as we've got the spec in place, that's the main thing.
Okay, so you'd be happy to have some data store on your end that had some kind of API that exposed routes data, and that's something you could just sort of handle on your, or exposed routes data as GeoJSON, and that's something you'd just be happy to handle on your own?
For us, yeah, that's what we've always assumed, because the way that the OpenActive, the main stuff's published, the main modelling stuff is, we didn't want to go down there, say, like the Gladstone route or anything like that either. So we like to publish it out all ourselves.
Mhm. Okay, so in that case, there's no sort of aggregation involved. It's your own self-standing shop front in a sense.
Yeah, and I think I don't know about other parties, but we have, when you're sort of taking money from the government, as we have, you also have the Inspire project. So we've done some of this, or made some of the data available anyway, obviously in a different form, in a different specification, different format, to cover the Inspire, which is an EU project or publishing mandate. So it's not like we're uncommon to doing this.
Okay, right. And what's Kent's sports view on this, Tim? Or has that not been thought of yet?
I sort of had a quick chat with Chris about it yesterday. It's getting slightly beyond my realms of expertise because I'm not massively technical minded. But we have a web developer who we work with on the Explore Kent website. So it would involve liaising with them basically and getting them to map the data from how they currently have it to meet the standards. So potential challenges there, obviously the cost that might involve, and yeah, any difficulties with how they currently have the data and how they can map it across. But yeah, we haven't had those discussions with the web developer yet.
Okay. Do you have a sense of a timeline for when you would like to engage with the developer, or is that kind of up in the air right now?
We haven't got a timeline, but I imagine it would be, there's fairly quick. How quickly they'd be able to do the work is another matter.
Right, yeah.
But certainly opening the discussions with them, can happen fairly imminently, I would have thought.
Okay, so this is interesting because I was expecting a different set of answers, because OpenActive's opportunities, or whatever you want to call them, typically we've been publishing them in using an aggregator, basically. So people do maintain their own little endpoints, but then we kind of suck all that into a central repository. Would you collectively see value in that? Or would you see that as kind of an unnecessary second step?
How would we get, so you're saying that we'd provide it as web services and you literally just, put a wrap around those, is that, or do you actually download the data and move it?
So what we've normally done is there's a specification called RPDE, which is real-time page data exchange. And that specifies essentially a very small API for how your opportunity data is exposed. And then we have applications that can read that format and slurp it up and republish it on an aggregation platform, basically. So yeah.
So it's just putting a wrap around it rather than actually downloading and moving the data, is that right?
Well, it would be downloaded in the sense that if you expose things according to that API, somebody on our, or actually rather a private company called IMIN probably, would use those APIs to periodically kind of pull your data,
to pull it down,
store it, and fix it a little bit if it was not that kind of thing. Well,
for the end user, that would make it one-stop shop, which would be obviously useful for them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, given that it's open data, in a sense, you can't stop us from doing that. But yeah, I was just wondering if any sort of further advantage was seen from you. I mean, from your organizations.
I think for us, we just publish it. If you want to strip it down, that's fine. That's whatever. I mean, because that's what we'll be doing to other people's feeds as well, taking the data and then repurposing it as we want to do. across our organisation. But I don't see, we wouldn't necessarily, we wouldn't do the work in terms of pushing it off to you guys, or but if you guys want to rip it down and put it into an aggregator, that's fine, no problems.
Okay. That might also be the
sorry, one other thing. Just one other thing I needed to clarify. I was speaking with Tara about this, but a lot of them, you use a CC by 4 license, but we're using the OpenGovernment license V3 instead to do this, because we've also taken government funding. We're under a slightly different license. It should all still be open, and it pretty much mirrors the CC by 4. But that's the only difference we'd have there, I think, as well.
Right. Okay. That's useful to know. On the face of it, I can't imagine that would be much of a problem. But I am not a lawyer, so.
Yeah, well, we've had. That's the point. We had our lawyers check it out, because we did initially look to publish it by CC by 4, but because that's what other people in OpenActive do. But they wanted it under the OGL V3 instead, because it's just more aligned to the government's way of publishing its open data.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I'll have to talk with Tara about it a little bit more, because I guess, but it feels more like a question of brand than anything else. That in a sense, a standard is a standard, and we would encourage its adoption, no matter what. But how that fits in with open data, I guess, is kind of an involved question.
And which standard you want to adopt?
Okay, and I think the other thing is the Ordnance Survey Get Outside campaign. I guess I'll need to talk to Ordnance Survey about how exactly one engages in that campaign. I'm not too sure how that's supposed to fit together right now. I'm not entirely sure Ordnance Survey knows the answer to that entirely.
Okay.
Okay, so it sounds like the ODI/OpenActive can actually be pretty light touch about this, that you guys are all chugging along, pretty merrily on your own. Would it be possible to set a date at, well, okay, sorry, 2 questions, getting ahead of myself. So the first question is, what kind of support could OpenActive supply to you that you would find helpful, if any?
I think once the root metadata is agreed, having a validator would be good, same as the modeling opportunity data, so you can fire a feed at it and it can tell you where it thinks it's wrong, or just, so that what you're publishing is in the correct format. Okay,
right. So just pretty much just extend the current validator to cover the root, and then you can, good. Okay. From Andy, that sounds like.
Yeah, I think Tim. I think Hugh Davis contacted you earlier today just about the idea of the sort of the hackathon type idea and where it goes from the standard to the presentation sort of layer. Yes, that's something that we'd see. The standard is really important for us, and then where it goes from there is the bit that we think you guys have got some expertise that we could probably draw on.
Okay, yeah, and I'll continue that correspondence with Hugh on that. Is that something you'd like to continue to have sight of?
Yeah, I gave it to Hugh because I'm off on holiday for 2 weeks, so I knew the time scale. So, but that's his idea, his baby is the idea of the hackathon to do it. So he'll be the one who will be driving on that one, really.
Okay, sure, yeah. Yeah, I would really like to take that forward as well. I feel like there's a lot of different definitions of what a hackathon is, so I guess we'll have to hash out in detail. Yeah. But I think as a word that inspires good feelings for this kind of problem, I think it's quite strong. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so a bit of a, I guess on the question of the hackathon. Is this something that might appeal to other people on this call? That if say we gather together a bunch of open roots data, if we did something like hosted something like the workshop again in London, would that be of interest to other people, or would that be kind of a distraction from other work you've got going on? Or is it hard to say?
I think from our point of view, it's probably a bit hard to say. Like I say, until we've sort of had that discussion with our web developer, because it would probably be them who would be doing the technical side of the work. So it'd probably be more useful for them to be involved in those kind of discussions, I guess. So yeah, a bit hard for us to say at the moment.
Okay. And equally, I guess it's up for the web developer to, decide what kind of support he or she needs.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, and how much depends a bit how much experience they've got in this kind of work as well. It might be something they can do in their sleep, or it might be something they need a bit more support on.
Okay. I mean, I'll just say as a general point of principle that certainly I'm more than happy to answer inquiries over email, or to have fairly extended calls with developers. We've done that with other bits of OpenActive. So yeah, the amount of time you can spend hashing through something like the booking specification with implementers is really quite extensive. So we're just offering quite fine-grained support if that's necessary.
Okay, that sounds great. Yeah, thank you. I'll definitely bear that in mind.
Yeah, don't hesitate to get in touch. I guess the second question, so following on from that, so if we got a validator up so that people knew that their data was good, or at least got a sense of it, get the hackathon going for kind of future directions. Would it be possible to set a deadline for when data would be up for OpenActive to review, so we can iterate on this?
Not for us at the moment. We've still got to finish an internal cell on part of the project. So no.
Right. Okay.
We'd be able to get some examples done quickly, but yeah, so it would be half a dozen walks or routes that we'll be able to do in the next month, I would say. Yeah. The one that's interesting for us that is the points of interest side of things, where it's not just the navigational side, it's how do you present that context. And we haven't bottomed that out yet, so how mature that would be, I'm not quite sure.
Well, I'd be very interested to see that, because that seems like one of the things that's a bit curious about roots metadata as opposed to roots, that it is about contextual information, and I'm surprised by how much of it's out there, particularly on national trust sites, which you seem to have a kind of a defined template for waypoint, title, description. But yeah, I think in some ways that's an easier question, that it doesn't involve like tremendous data munging in the same way that some geo stuff.
No.
But yeah, presentationally, UI, all of those questions get a lot harder. So if you could share a first pass at that as soon as you could, I'd be really interested. Because
it's maybe just one walk we're working on, isn't it? Is it the archaeology walk, where we've got that information at Avebury, which we're using like a case study internally, so we should be able to move that into some digestible format relatively easily.
Okay. It would be, even any kind of just data sampling would be fantastic to get a sense of where the rough patches are. Is that Hugh that I should communicate with while you're on holiday?
It's probably Andy here, actually. Hugh will be thinking about how it fits into the wider picture, but Andy will be actually hacking the data.
Okay, right. Okay, I'll be pestering you for that then.
Okay.
I guess for the rest of you, because it sounds like Canal and River Trust and Kent Sport, you're just not quite at the production stage yet. So I guess I'll just keep nagging you for data as it occurs to me.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Is there, mostly aimed at Paul here, I mean, is there anything with regard to the InterFall, is there anything that OpenActive could do that would make that easier for you?
No, I've already been in touch with Izzy and Tara understands why we're at where we're at. So yeah, so it's part political as well. So once we get over that, hopefully we should be good.
Okay. I guess the only thing I'd urge is that, yeah, as I say, the Ordnance survey campaign is going to be September 29th. So if stuff isn't done fairly well in advance of that, it's just not going to make it in. But that's going to be of very importance to different organizations, of course.
Do you know what sort of form that is going to take, Tim? Is it sort of activity finder type job, or?
I'm hoping Andy will answer that for me, since I see his microphone's lit up. But basically, no, I don't know enough about the Ordnance survey campaign to say.
Okay.
We suspect it'll be walks in the OS maps. Is the underpinning. That's what we're expecting, I think.
Yeah, I guess it's fair enough that OS would be kind of underpinning everything, but.
It'd be interesting if we serve up our data in OSM and then put it in OS maps. That would be an interesting one for them.
Yeah, popular that. Okay. Yeah, and I'm not sure. It could be that the campaign is still a little bit under development right now, so we could see if we could broaden the scope a little bit. But yeah, it sounds like that's more Tara's job than something I'm going to understand. Okay, I think that about covers this slide. I kind of mentioned the idea of a workshop or hackathon, but it sounds like people are generally speaking not there yet. So if we could just share data as and when it becomes available with me, that would be fantastic, just so I can have my eyes on it. And so then, yeah, there's been the rest of the call. I was just hoping for contributions or to flag up some issues that need contributions. Currently under discussion on GitHub. And actually, one of them didn't quite make it onto the slide because the comment was only made either yesterday or this morning. The first is a question of risk vocabulary, because this was something we really dug into at the workshop, and I think we made some nice progress there. I thought, oh my God, this is intractable, and then there were actually plenty of fairly concrete suggestions. I think, however, it does need a bit of fleshing out. I've defined a number of fields, or rather I copied the fields that were defined in the workshop into the specification. But what the values would be is still a little bit up in the air. And I think even more importantly, in some ways, the form of words of the values has not really been thought through, because I think we want to avoid a situation where we're scaring people off participating by overstressing the nature of the risk, by maybe making the language a little too vivid or informal. So I think there's a lot of questions around risk vocabulary. I can imagine a situation where we've got like a nice kind of content management system or something that gives you, a drop down of suggested terms for the various risk fields. But what we want those values to be, I think, deserves some careful thought. So if people could chip in there, that would be fantastic.
Point on the structure of the known risks, the modifiers, and the mitigators. Just whether I felt like, as they're modelled, that's probably the most flexible way. There's no real, like, when we were thinking about it, because I was on the group in the workshop, we were looking at this. I think we were thinking that there might be modifiers and mitigators per known risk, so the arrays would actually kind of match.
Okay, so.
But I think, as you just discovered, a lot of the modifiers and mitigators kind of apply to multiple risks, and to some extent, not locking it down too tightly would avoid it either being incredibly repetitive or seeming like this, it would be hard to parse that data into, here's a risk and here's 5 modifiers and 4 mitigators, and here's another risk and that's got the same 5 modifiers and 4 mitigators or whatever. So sort of felt like you would allow for a slightly more discursive approach by not locking them together and just saying these things are factors to bear in mind when assessing the risks that you found. So actually they're not the same array. They're not indexed to the same thing. But to your question about a standard vocabulary, it feels like one could emerge, but I am worried that not having, well, I guess you've got the risk description, so you could potentially use that. This is more of a taxonomy kind of thing, isn't it, where you basically might want to check if you're going out at night, is it okay at night? So you want to check a tag for the risk modifier, for instance. Is this? And how it must be quite a common, establishing a tagging scheme must be quite a common activity in the open data world. Do you typically throw it out there, get 1,000 records in and see how it shakes out, rather than trying to guess them all in advance? What do you think the good approach to this would be?
I think our challenge, I'd have to do a little more data exploration, but from what I've seen, I think the challenge is that actually that information is not usually recorded except in very small pools. I can't remember who said this, but I was hesitating to include risk in much detail at all, but somebody observed that because the process of creating data for routes is kind of curatorial, so you might start off with a very sketchy kind of understanding and then you add more information to it over time, that there was kind of scope for adding that information, and that if people might not think to collect it in the first place, but if they knew that there was a field defined for collecting that information, they would provide it. So I don't think we can, it's kind of aspirational, I guess, that part of the standard. So I don't think what we can do is kind of survey all of the information we've got out there, look at some common patterns and kind of sift for the most common ones. I think it's kind of about saying what we would like to see. It could be maybe that has to be guided more by user research or something like that. But it's something that sort of has to be created out of nothing, more or less. I also think it might be something that it might be the case that the taxonomy never does all of the work, because it's quite a nuanced sort of thing. So I can imagine even if you had, I don't know, risk, poor terrain, mitigated by lighting so you can see where you're going, affected by weather, something like that. You're always going to want further information about how likely that is and what kind of equipment you should bring along to cope with it, if you decide you want to plunge in anyway. So it could be that you always have to have a fair bit of free text there, kind of nuancing the more defined fields. But yeah, as I say, right now, I don't think we've got any of that. So it's about putting something there to make that process possible. Yeah, there was a little bit defined. I believe the Forestry Commission, Forestry Commission did have a sort of vocabulary for path maintenance and how regularly they were maintained, and that's a risk mitigator, obviously. So there are little bits of information we can glean here and there, but I think it's very much a work in progress. So yeah, please jump on the issue basically, and if you've got ideas for things that are prospectively useful, that might at least define the territory, and then we can take a look at what users want, maybe, and look at the demand as well as the supply issue.
Have you been in touch with the guys at Safe in the City, just to see what they are finding that people are reporting through their app?
No, and they would be the right people to talk to. I mean, I did have sort of one email exchange with them, but I haven't really consulted them. I haven't posed any well-formed questions to them, so that's certainly a good next action.
Yeah, I don't know whether they're simply measuring, someone basically dropping a pin saying there was a problem here, or whether they have at least some it wouldn't be the whole thing. I doubt whether they're reporting, safe in the city, they're reporting, terrain bumpiness or danger of falling off a cliff or whatever. But it would, certainly for urban stuff, that would be interesting to talk to, and informal routes rather than the sort of more maintained routes that we talked about. And I think the is maintained and is maintained by things, it's good to see in there as well. That's something that the Forestry Commission felt was a useful mechanism to offset the worry that you simply talk about risks without having anything balancing it.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, Safe in the City I'd really like to talk to, because part of the mission really is to get people who wouldn't normally engage in outdoor pursuits outdoors, and then urban settings become much more important typically.
Yeah.
Yeah, people who just don't think of leaving the city. They might want to start in the Lee Valley, or they might want to go through an urban canal or something like that. And we would, yeah, having some mechanism for dealing with that would be fantastic. So yeah. They've got access to a lot of data. That's what's nice about their app. I don't know if we have access to that kind of richness, but it'd certainly be the right people to talk to.
Yep.
Okay, so that's risk. As I say, yeah, I'll talk to Safe and the City. But if anyone has any ideas, please chip in. Gradient. I think that's probably mostly a solved problem. Andy, was it you who was commenting about the units that are used for gradient?
Perhaps it was it on the last call that we were talking about? I'm not sure we've got round to commenting on the issues on the GitHub yet, but yeah, we can start contributing on there. Was that maybe something we picked up on the last call?
Yeah, it's surfaced a few times, but it's nicely it's kind of narrowing down. So now it's really just about the kind of units you support and whether integers should be positive or negative for elevation loss and that kind of stuff. So it's quite fine grained. Yeah, that's about it really. I think we can actually deal with gradient and put it to bed fairly soon. Okay. So yeah, do jump on. Oh yeah, I guess one sort of general question. Does anybody use imperial measurements when talking about elevation?
No, it's all meters, isn't it, we use?
I think so, yeah.
And it'll all be meters rather than, I don't know, centimeters or fractions of meters or something. I guess you might have.
Yeah.
Do you ever get sort of 500.5 meters as an elevation?
I think we'd use round meters, to be honest.
Precision. Yeah. Okay. I just like defining the data types quite tightly because it's easy to validate then. So if we could say this will be a positive integer, that would be my favorite solution most of the time. If we could just assume that it's going to be meters in all circumstances, that's fantastic. And if we define it as an integer, we don't have to worry about whether people specify it as m or write out meters and all of that stuff. We can just get a number. Okay, so one of the tangled points is modeling bits of routes, which happens quite a bit actually. That seems to be quite standard. It seems like almost all national trust routes, for instance, are composed of numbered segments, basically. So you get sort of guided through.
Yes, they are. Whether that's right going forward is an interesting matter, but often that will be the case. The navigation and, as said, the point of interest stuff. That's how it sort of interplays. Yeah.
So I'm just going to duck and weave a little bit here because I see I have to plug in my computer. What's your hesitation about that going forward? Because it does seem like a very common kind of pattern for describing routes. But what's your hesitation there?
For spreading load, we've got a big surge in visitor numbers. and we've got to try and spread them out a bit more. So having everyone doing the same thing has been questioned, and I think that's more for us to deal with. I think that will complicate your standard far too much to be considering sort of dynamic routes and things. So.
Oh, but that's interesting. The problem is that everybody shows up. If everyone's following the path in the same way, you end up with a giant herd of people. Is that okay? Right.
But then, you know, that's kind of why you create routes, right? So people do an orchestrated thing. That's
true. And then I guess there's a different audience who are consulting their OS maps and right. Okay. But yeah, the issue that creates if you've got segmented routes is I kind of went quite liberal in how that was defined. And I basically said a route segment is just a little route, basically, with a couple of constraints on it to avoid things like infinite recursion. So a route segment can't have another route segment and that kind of stuff. But I was very, liberal in kind of just saying, you know, route segments and routes are the same thing and you just attach one to the other, basically. I don't see a problem with that, except that it does create an ambiguity, which we discussed a bit on the last call, about where you attach particular pieces of information, whether something should live on a route, whether something should live on a route segment, what the semantics are of having the same property declared on a route and a route segment, that kind of thing. I took a kind of quite blunt instrument approach to dealing with that and wrote a little table saying, these things do inherit between routes and route segments, these things don't.
Right.
And that's about it. I can imagine that judgment being quite open to question, and I can imagine it generating problems in a lot of specific instances. I can't imagine what those specific instances are, but I'm guessing that data providers will. So if people could take a look at that and even just coming up with kind of edge cases or exceptions to the rule would be really helpful, because I feel like this is quite a core part of the specification. And if it goes wrong, it's going to be quite messy. That modeling hierarchy, nasty.
One thing I've just seen on there is the OA activity. You said that that's inherited to a segment, but that might not be the case, where you maybe have to do walking at one point, but you can do, say, cycling or some other activity at another point.
Okay, so the way I was hoping that this would work, and I maybe need to is that it's kind of an override system. So heritable attributes, you can always override them. So if you declare, if you declared that it was a walking trail, but actually a couple of segments were also, you know, crossed over with a bridleway or something, you could still say on the children, you know, walking, comma, equine or something like that. So yeah, it's not as monolithic as that.
So just to go the other way, how would distance work then? So distance would inherited unless it was given something, or because you said no, you have to give it a specific value for that segment. Is that correct?
Yeah. So distance, if declared on the, well, then that's actually sort of easy in the sense that it's distance is not inherited. So if distance is declared on the route parent, it's the distance of the route. It's the total distance, if you will. And if it's declared on the route segment, it's the distance of the segment. So yeah, you would not assume, obviously, that if something was 6.9K on the parent route, that every segment was 6.9K, right?
Yeah. So you explicitly cannot inherit there then. It's the opposite way. Yeah. And sorry, and for a start point and end point, obviously for the start segment or the first segment, that will be the same start point as the overall for the. Is that there? No, it's not. That's okay. That's all right. It's fine.
Yeah, the start point is the messy one because it's possible to have a number of start points, right? So it gets a little hinky if you think, well, you know, there's 4 start points on a route. 3 of which, you know, you declare at the route level, 3 of which are also the starts of route segments, 1 of which just happens to be a sort of access point that you've got. the semantics of how you interpret that is tricky, I think.
What about escape points along the route as well?
Yeah, it's an analogous problem, right? Endpoint, I suppose, is what would describe that. And again, I think that weirdly, then it kind of inherits upwards in a way, in that you would assume that if it was possible to end any segment at a point, then you would be exiting the route at that point as well.
But you might have, sorry, what I'm thinking of is you might have a route which is, I don't know, 2 kilometers long, but along that route there's other escape points. Would they need to be captured as part of this, or would they just be sort of incidental, like kind of waypoints, I guess, or something along the way, that route?
I think you would model that. You could model that in a variety of ways, and of course that's fine in terms of modeling, but it's annoying if you're a data consumer sometimes. I think I would model that as endpoint, which is an array, at the root level. And then if you also indicated that at the segment level, that would be fine. The problem would arise is if you had endpoints declared at the level of the segment that didn't exist on the route as a whole. I think that would just be a validation error of some kind.
So are we saying that endpoints then is an array rather than just one particular value?
Yeah, endpoint and start point, endpoint of interest, arrays. Yeah, you can declare as many of them as you like.
Okay.
Yeah, that's actually a point there, because we've got quite a few trails that have little optional bits on them. So you've got the route, and it's like, oh, and you can go up here if you want to see that. You can miss that out if you don't want to go up the steps, or you can go round, that sort of thing. I hadn't thought of that before. How would that work?
That's the sort of things we were thinking about as well.
Yeah, hold on. That's a very good issue.
So as a concrete example, you can either take a towpath, say, through a tunnel sometimes, or there's a path over a tunnel. You can walk over it or around it. So there's different ways depending on what you want to do.
Right. I think that's actually probably okay. So because routes right now, the limitation, which is exactly what the problem this points to, the limitation is that route segments are unlike routes in that you have to declare an integer value sequence value for them. So they're always rigidly ordered. And those have to, be sequential. So it sounds like you need some mechanism for alternatives so that you could have, segment 2A and segment 2B.
Almost like a junction, I guess. You sort of a junction point, and then you can define the 2 routes off of that. The 2 sort of subsections, segments.
I mean, how is that communicated when you publish videos? Is it just a verbal description saying, here's an alternative, free text field?
Yeah, and also I guess because we have a little map, so you can indicate it through the 2 different lines, different colours. So if it goes through the tunnel, you can do a dashed line for it, and if it's over, you've obviously got you've got a solid line that goes over, and you can do this differently. You can colour those differently as well.
I wonder if maybe this just takes another field called something like alternative. In fact, maybe you don't even need another field. You just need the ability to specify multiple. You can repeat sequence values basically. So you could say sequence, route segment 1, route segment 2, route segment 3, and 3, and 3. You want to know that that's an error, though, actually, don't you? It could be that you model that just by a Boolean flag saying alternative route or something, or alternative segment or something like that, or alternative 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And actually, that's kind of nice because one of the comments on existing on GitHub right now is with root segments saying these things should have their own URL so that you can refer to them directly without necessarily referring to the parent root. And I was a little bit like, well, what's the point of that really? How often is that really going to happen in reality? But it could be actually that if you've got 3 alternatives, you wanted to point to each other and say, you know, these 3 all do the same thing.
So it allows you to mix and match different routes together or different segments. So in our case, or taking the National Trust, there might be a walk for National Trust, which then close to a towpath. We can then meld those 2 together and then drop back on, say, a National Trust or onto just a conventional roadway or something like that. So you can actually pick out those bits of the segment which can join your land or can join other lands and create other routes from it.
Right, okay. Yeah, it gets messy, I guess, when you've got lots of branching possibilities. So I suppose if you had an alternative and another set of, well, again, you can just keep.
But that's not the problem, or that's surely the consuming person's problem to deal with, how they do that. The fact is that you're publishing the data out there, open data, that people can do what they want with it. How they join the data up afterwards is their problem.
Yeah, I think in principle that's true. I think the difficulty is, like, you know, if we're hoping to have app developers say pick up this data and run with it, sometimes you have to smooth things a little bit. You know, build a smoothing layer on top sometimes. But yeah, I take your point that if the data is messy because the world is messy, artificially simplifying it isn't a solution at all. Okay, I'll get the preceding discussion up onto GitHub then, because that was extremely valuable. And yeah, thank God you said that, actually. That could have been messy. Okay, so we've got 2 minutes left. So I guess the question is, have you guys got anything else you need to see addressed in the near future, in the next 2 weeks?
Could I just go back to that slide? The last one is, so is the intention that routes will be its own specification? Because I would be a firm yes, if that is possible.
Yeah, I would. I think it'll get very complicated trying to keep the metadata with the routes, and I think they need to be split.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's two yeses. So you'd prefer to see that as its own specification, a separate document, self-standing, apart from opportunity. Okay. Okay, that's useful to know. Yeah, actually, that was my original thinking, and then I thought, why does that seem more helpful to me? But
well, it gives app developers that you're talking about the opportunity to do something where they don't have to get involved necessarily with the opportunity data as well. So they can, you've got a potential spur there for people to use that, or the OS or whoever, to go and use those routes or bits of routes as they want to do. Right.
Okay. Yeah. So it's more, modular, I suppose, that way.
Otherwise, you've essentially got to try and load every map or every route or whatever, try and tie it to some sort of event or opportunity all the time, which may be difficult for some things to be done.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is just a data object, really. So you could publish routes on their own and label it opportunity data, and you could have a feed that consisted of nothing but routes. It would be possible to do that under the current specification, in fact. But that does kind of really, that's just sort of begging the question, because really what it's saying is this is this is something where you can ignore the rest of the spec if you want to, which kind of implies that actually it is its own specification.
I mean, so yeah, as a sort of maybe a concrete example, if say the National Trust was trying to publish a trail, they'd have to do it as an opportunity at the moment, wouldn't they? And in terms of the duration time and when it's running between, that I'm assuming it'd be sort of 365, 24/7 essentially, or most of the time that they want that control to be available. So would they have to keep publishing it on a daily basis, or would they have to like publish it with a really long time, and then it would gradually drop down the RDP feed, RDPE feed? You know, they'd have to keep probably pushing it back in so that it became available, or the consumers noticed it. Whereas if this was in its own specification, those people, app developers or whoever, can just go and hit those routes there themselves and see what routes are available, and then look to integrate it into their own applications.
Right. So yeah, you'd see this is living in a separate feed as well, really, because it's quite different from how you'd consume.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm pretty happy to take 2 votes as pretty decisive, unless anyone else on the call feels strongly, because it is conceptually quite different from the rest of the opportunity spec.
Yeah, I think it needs to be thought through a bit more before that decision's made, because again, they're fundamentally related, but they are different.
Mm-hmm.
And does it complicate things to split them? But my gut instinct is they're different and should be treated differently, but related to each other. But I haven't thought that through in a lot of detail.
Yeah, well, I mean, we did discuss it a bit, and I think it was kind of integrated simply because it's actually fairly small. It's not that complicated, routes, ultimately, and often you will want to refer from an opportunity to a route.
I think I proposed an endpoint in the opportunity metadata, I think, so that would point to the route that you were interested in or was related to the opportunity if you wanted to do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
That gives you the flexibility of keeping both things separate but relating them as well, because you could also do the same on the route side if you wanted to, where you could say it's relevant to these opportunities. So you could point back there as well, but ideally it would just go from the opportunity to the routes themselves.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't. There weren't any functional reasons really why we kept them, yeah, as unified. It was, I guess, it was really more about different perceptions of whether simplicity consists of small, simple things separated, or whether simplicity consists of having one thing that's complicated. And yeah, the monolithic view won out. But yeah, we'll revisit it. But I would strongly suspect that, yeah, if there's a feeling amongst data publishers, i.e. you guys, that it would be convenient to have it separated out, you know, that readily tips the balance. Maybe if I could just ask you to express your views actually on the GitHub issue, because that is I think it's a question.
Sure.
Roots, and that would just keep the discussion maybe more easier to access than it is on this call. Any other business from anyone?
No.
Okay, cool. So as I say, please don't hesitate to get in touch if you need if you've got any mapping questions or need any technical assistance questions. I will talk to Hugh about hackathons and things. We'll start nagging you all for data in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Cheers. Bye.
Okay, thanks. Cheers. Bye.